You could sense it when Bishop Paul Morton took the pulpit for the final time. The atmosphere changed. With tears in their eyes and hearts laden with thanksgiving, the congregation went silent. The farewell for Bishop Morton wasn't simply a conclusion after decades of service, leadership, and legacy. Everyone was reminded in that instant of the original reason he had been called, but even the most stoic churchgoers were rendered dumbfounded by what transpired during that tearful farewell. Before leaving the pulpit for the last time, Bishop Morton uttered something you won't believe. Bishop Paul S. Morton, one of the most significant voices in contemporary ministry and the founder of the Full Gospel Baptist Church Fellowship, stood before his congregation for the last time. After more than 50 years of preaching, leading, and changing lives, it was no ordinary Sunday service. History was being made. There were individuals from all generations in the church, and the atmosphere was charged with passion. It was more than just a retirement announcement. As Bishop Morton's voice shook with appreciation and sorrow, it marked the end of a spiritual journey that had influenced hundreds of people's lives. One had the impression that something much more profound was taking place, something that went beyond the church's actual boundaries. As the cameras rolled, recording every tear and every standing ovation, we're taking you inside that historic moment in this video, revealing the circumstances around Bishop Morton's decision to resign, how his parting remarks brought the entire congregation to tears, and what this change means for the future of the church he founded from the bottom up. You'll learn the real story behind the scenes, the feelings that many people sought to suppress, and the spiritual lesson that transformed his departure into a time for introspection. Because even though Bishop Morton's farewell was moving, there's more to it than meets the eye. One concerning faith, legacy, and the high price of leadership. You won't believe how profoundly this event affected individuals present and why it's currently a topic of discussion in the Christian community. It's not just a farewell, so stay tuned. It serves as a lesson on humility, purpose, and the passing of a time. We must go back a long way before the tears, before the packed sanctuary, and before the farewell address that changed the world in order to really comprehend the emotion that went into Bishop Paul Morton's departure. The narrative of Bishop Morton starts with a young man who ventured to think that ministry could involve transformation rather than just tradition. Paul Sylvester Morton was born in 1950 in Canada and grew up in a household where faith was lived rather than merely talked about. Bishop C.L. Morton, Sr., his father, was a strong leader and preacher in his own right. Young Paul also witnessed firsthand what it meant to be a true spiritual leader. Paul had a vision that would go far beyond anyone's wildest expectations, although many might have been happy to just follow in their father's footsteps. Bishop Morton was youthful, fervent, and not scared to push the boundaries of what the church could be when he started serving as its pastor in New Orleans. He thought that worship could be open, expressive, and dynamic, and that ministry shouldn't be constrained by outdated structures. Bishop Morton bravely embraced innovation at a time when many churches were averse to it. He made faith feel more intimate again by introducing new musical genres, promoting public displays of worship, and building relationships with individuals. This strategy caught on fire. Greater Street Stephen Missionary Baptist Church grew from a modest local congregation to one of the most significant churches in America under his direction. The message of grace, excellence, and empowerment spread like wildfire, and the music was amazing, and the services were crowded. Before long, people all over the country were seeing Bishop Morton preach, not because he was ostentatious, but because he was genuine. However, Bishop Morton's influence extended beyond a single church. He established the Full Gospel Baptist Church Fellowship in 1994, a movement that would transform worship globally. The premise was straightforward but revolutionary. It would allow churches with a Baptist heritage to fully utilize the power of the Holy Spirit. Pastors and congregations from all walks of life were drawn to this vision because it broke down boundaries and created bridges. Thousands of leaders, including many of the most well-known pastors, gospel musicians, and ministry leaders of today, found a spiritual home in the fellowship under his direction. Bishop Morton developed become more than just a preacher through leadership summits, seminars, and worship sessions. In a generation desperate for power and truth, he became a father figure, a mentor, and a voice of moderation. His impact went much beyond the pulpit over the years. Hit songs including Bow Down and Worship Him, Let It Rain, and I'm Still Standing were part of his music ministry and were used as the background music for worship sessions all over the world. He was adored in the gospel music industry, as well as in church circles for his ability to combine inspired music with compelling preaching. Despite his widespread fame and ministry accomplishments, Bishop Morton maintained a modest demeanor. He frequently stated that witnessing others gain a deeper understanding of Christ brought him more delight than celebrity or numbers. He gave his all to developing new leaders, encouraging younger pastors, and reminded them that servant leadership, not prestige, is the essence of genuine ministry. The church community was so deeply affected when it became known that Bishop Morton was getting ready to retire. Many found it hard to envision Sunday mornings or the fellowship without his voice, his enthusiasm, and his unshakable faith. People started to consider how much his leadership had influenced entire generations of Christians as well as churches. However, nobody could have foreseen how poignant that last moment would be, even as the excitement for his parting increased. Because people close to him knew the truth, even while others saw a famous bishop concluding a chapter, that there was a man silently struggling with the weight of letting go beneath the strength and the grin. The assembly was experiencing a range of emotions as the day of his farewell speech drew near. Members traveled from all around the nation to see it firsthand. Some are arriving by plane from all around the world. There was unquestionably sadness mixed with joy, celebration, and thankfulness. They were aware that they were bidding farewell to more than just a leader. They were bidding farewell to a devout parent. Even though his trip to the pulpit had been impactful, what transpired at that farewell service would uncover something more profound: the heart of a man who has dedicated his life to his work. The crowd had never encountered anything like the atmosphere that morning at the chapel. People poured into the sanctuary as soon as the doors opened. Young and elderly, men and women, faces full of happiness and sorrow. A few had tissues with them. Others wore silently reverent looks. It was no ordinary Sunday. History was being written. The worship team started off with songs that established the mood for what was sure to be a memorable day. Bishop Morton's favorite song, Let It Rain, was performed by the choir, and many were unable to contain their tears as the shouts filled the room. This was the same tune that had helped people get through difficult times, the same hymn that had given churches all throughout the nation new life, and now it was featured on the soundtrack of Farewell. The whole crowd stood up when Bishop Morton finally took the platform. The cheers were thunderous. While some yelled, others just stood silently with their palms up in appreciation. The weight of 40 years of service was evident in the room at that very moment. It was more than simply a pastor who stood in front of them. In a world that had undergone significant change since he first joined the pulpit, he served as a spiritual father, a mentor, and a voice of truth. Bishop Morton stopped as he got close to the microphone. He remained silent for a minute. He merely grinned as he glanced out across the room at the thousands of faces that were staring back at him. However, that smile wasn't that of a man who had accomplished everything. It was the smile of someone who understood that saying goodbye would be more difficult than anyone had anticipated. His voice carried the same steady authority that had characterized his ministry when he started talking. There was a discernible trembling beneath that power, though, the type that only occurs when faith and emotion clash. He began by talking about thankfulness. Thanks to God, he has been able to endure every season. He is grateful to his church, who have been his family for decades, and to his wife, Pastor Deborah Morton, who has supported him through every hardship and triumph. Then he changed his tone. He started to think more on the journey than the achievements. He discussed the difficulties that go on behind the scenes, the periods of uncertainty, the restless nights, and the occasions when he wondered if he was actually having an impact. He acknowledged that leading others had not always been simple, and that it took a strength that only God could provide. "I've preached to you for years about faith, about trusting God in the unknown, but now it's my turn to walk by faith," he said, causing a powerful silence in the room. "My season is changing, and as difficult as it is, I have to trust that God's next move for my life is still good." At that moment, something changed in the room. People were witnessing a transition, not just a farewell. They were hearing muffled sobs throughout the audience. Bishop Morton had always been open about his humanity, and on that particular day, his vulnerability had a greater impact than any sermon. In a moment that caught everyone off guard, Bishop Morton transformed his message into a call for unity. He continued by explaining that stepping away from leadership did not mean stepping away from purpose. I may not be leading from the front anymore, but I'll still be praying, mentoring, and cheering on those who will carry the torch forward. He firmly said, "The work of the kingdom must continue. Don't let my retirement be the end of momentum. Let it be the beginning of revival." As he spoke, cameras captured faces in the audience, longtime members wiping away tears, younger leaders nodding with conviction, and visitors who had simply come to be part of this historic moment. He urged the congregation and pastors across the country not to let division or ego undo what years of love and labor had built. Then, the unexpected moment arrived, when the choir began to softly sing, bow down, and worship him. And Bishop Morton closed his eyes. Pastors, church leaders, and gospel artists from all over the nation had gathered to pay their respects, and some of the most reputable names in ministry were present, standing shoulder to shoulder in one of the most united displays the church world had seen in years. As he raised his hands in worship, tears ran down his cheeks, and for almost 5 minutes, the whole congregation joined him. Thousands of voices joined in, singing, crying, and worshiping, as though heaven itself had stopped to observe the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Bishop Morton's voice broke through the music at the height of that devotion. "This isn't goodbye," he said. The church exploded with the simple phrase, "See you later." All at once, everybody stood, yelled, and cried. Bishop Morton was captured in that moment, as he had always been. A leader who led others to God rather than himself. Family members, friends, and leaders who had been influenced by his ministry paid tribute as the funeral went on. A few people told personal tales. Others read letters of appreciation, but all of the testimonies came back to the same indisputable fact. Bishop Paul Morton made a lasting impression on the church community that was based on loyalty rather than celebrity. After Bishop Paul Morton's farewell service, the days that followed were truly remarkable. Videos of his tearful farewell started making the rounds on social media as soon as his final sermon ended. A few snippets of his shaky voice, his moving remarks, and that moment he raised his hands in praise for the final time as senior pastor. Posts from fans, gospel musicians, and church leaders expressing thanks, admiration, and intense sorrow over what many referred to as the end of an era quickly inundated the internet. Instagram and Twitter turned into online monuments of gratitude. Hashtags such as hashtag Paul Morton, hashtag Full Gospel Heritage, and hashtag Thank You Bishop Morton. Farewell started to gain popularity in Christian and gospel communities on a variety of media. Individuals were testifying and sharing personal tales of how his preaching had impacted their lives. Some recalled how his songs, such as Bow Down and Let It Rain, had helped them get through difficult times. Others recalled his sermons that spurred the founding of new ministries worldwide and broke down barriers across religions. The story was widely covered by major gospel media, including the Christian Post, Praise 102.5, and the Gospel Today Network. His last service was characterized as a time of divine transition and a lovely conclusion to a life of devoted leadership. On social media, prominent pastors like Bishop T.D. Jakes, Pastor John Gray, and Bishop Marvin Sapp paid respect to Bishop Morton, recognizing how his life and ministry had enabled many of them to succeed in their own vocations. Bishop Morton did more than establish a church, he built a movement. Bishop Jakes stated, "Leadership isn't about longevity, it's about legacy. His influence will endure beyond all of his sermons." Pastor John Gray went on to say, "He led with grace, loved with courage, and concluded strong, showing us how to serve God without losing our humanity." Even gospel legends like Yolanda Adams and Donnie McLaren posted heartfelt messages recalling their time on stage with him. calling him a father figure in faith and praising his unwavering integrity in a time when many prioritized fame over purpose. However, it was the sincere words of regular believers that stood out the most, not the celebrity tributes. The internet was inundated with video clips and handwritten notes from small churches, urban ministries, and overseas congregations. One woman in Louisiana shared a post that went viral, claiming that Bishop Morton's sermons had helped her get through the most difficult time in her life, while another young pastor in South Africa referred to him as the link that enabled black preachers worldwide to engage in international ministry. His wife, Pastor Deborah Morton, gave arguably the most heartfelt response when she stood on stage the day following the farewell at a smaller midweek service and remarked, "I've watched my husband pour out everything he had into God's people for over 40 years. His time, his tears, and his truth have all been given, and even if one chapter ends today, I am aware that his mission is far from over. He is merely embarking on a new ministry that is guided by rest and wisdom." The assembly erupted in tears and applause once she finished speaking. Soon after, news organizations started considering Bishop Morton's wider influence. They went over his groundbreaking establishment of the Full Gospel Baptist Church Fellowship, which allowed many Christians to freely practice Pentecostal worship in conventional Baptist environments. That choice alone altered the character of contemporary worship. Many congregations had trouble balancing denominational order with spiritual fire prior to Morton's leadership. However, his audacity built a bridge that permitted the Holy Spirit's fire to spread freely and unhindered through Baptist congregations all over the world. Since then, academics and religious analysts have emphasized Bishop Morton's inclusive, balanced, and visionary leadership style. He was renowned for upholding biblical truth while welcoming innovation, a unique trait that made him incredibly respected and relatable. His impact extended beyond the pulpit. He was one of the few preachers to successfully combine gospel music and ministry because of his voice as a recording artist. Morton gave people who might never have entered a church a message of hope through songs like "Let It Rain" and "Cry Your Last Tear." Online discussions were dominated by an underlying question, despite the fact that people were applauding his achievements. What follows? Without Bishop Morton leading the Full Gospel Baptist Church Fellowship, many questioned what the organization's future would hold. Because of his charisma and the decades-long trust he had earned, his departure left large shoes to fill. Bishop Morton had already responded to that in his departure speech. "I am not responsible for this church's future. It is dependent upon God. I planted, I've given it some water, I now take a back seat to allow the next generation to develop." Just that line, which represented humility and faith in God's sovereignty, became one of his speech's most frequently quoted passages. His remarks were quickly echoed by younger pastors and leaders, who challenged their congregations to think about purpose-driven faith rather than personality-driven leadership. His career was featured in special parts on gospel radio stations, which played past sermons, music, and interviews. In order to share how Bishop Morton had impacted their lives, listeners called in, some crying, others expressing their sincere appreciation. "I never met him in person, but his voice was like a father's hug over the radio," one caller remarked. Every phrase felt personal. In the meantime, videos of his goodbye kept gaining views from both gospel music lovers and those who had never paid any attention to the church world. Viewers from various walks of life were drawn in by the moment's emotional sincerity. There were many comments along the lines of, "I don't even go to church, but this moved me."